Hello and welcome to People and Profit. I'm Kate Moody. Stable but underwhelming. That's how the International Monetary Fund has described the trajectory of the global economy as it turns the page on its inflationary spike. At its annual fall meeting with the World Bank, the IMF kept its forecast for economic growth unchanged from July at 3.2%, but warned of geopolitical risks, notably in the Middle East, as well as a renewed trend towards protectionism, which could derail that. The United States is still expected to be the major engine for global growth, with its GDP forecast to expand 2.8% this year. That's slightly more than the IMF's July projection. Both the Eurozone and China are now on track for slower paces of growth, 0.8 and 4.8% respectively. The IMF also slightly downgraded its forecast for growth in emerging market and developing economies to 4.2% for the year. Unveiling the October report in Washington, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva hailed global efforts to reduce inflation, which is now forecast to cool from 6.7% last year to 5.8% this year, but she warned that higher prices are still a reality.
A combination of resolute monetary policy action, easing supply chain constraints, and moderating food and energy prices is guiding us back in the direction of price stability. And this has been done without tipping the global economy into recession and large-scale job losses. But the higher price level that we all feel in our wallets is here to stay. Families are hurting, people are angry.
Let's cross now to Axel von Trotsenburg, Senior Managing Director at the World Bank, responsible for development policy and partnerships. Thank you for joining us on People and Profit today. Now, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund marked 80 years since their founding this year. Back in 1944, the World Bank's mission was to foster economic development and reconstruction after World War II. How do you define that mission today?
Actually, in the original mission, it was about reconstruction and development. And it is also in the original title of the World Bank, namely the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Both are still enormously relevant today. Development is a key issue, but also the reconstruction. This is because we are seeing fragility all over the place, as well as still there are wars, and therefore we will need to be engaged in the full reconstruction. We had, of course, hoped more to be on the development side, but reconstruction remains very important. What is important that after 80 years, this is an institution that continuously evolves with times, and we need to be staying relevant for the issues of the day.
There has been significant criticism of the World Bank over the years. People are concerned about issues like it's dominated by wealthy Western countries, that lending conditions sometimes force impoverished economies further into difficulty. Do you believe that any of those concerns are valid? And what is the bank doing to try to respond?
Well, first of all, I think an international organization should always be subject to scrutiny. There should be critical questions, there should be criticism, and we should be held accountable and transparent about what we are doing. So I do welcome this. I do not agree with all the criticism, but I think there is enormous value on this, that it makes us better to respond. I would say that this is an organization that has changed enormously over time, and also on the representation of countries. Take the two largest shareholders, the United States and the UK in 1946. They had 52% of the voting shares. That has been reduced by over 60%. So they have both combined about 20 percentage points in voting shares. So there are large changes happening, but we need to change often faster. We need also to respond to new needs. And I think what we have shown over the last couple of years, particularly when you see on COVID, an enormous response also in climate change. But we clearly recognize that as an international organization, you want to be as helpful to the international community as possible, and more often needs to be done. And we do not disagree with that.
Now, in January 2023, the World Bank unveiled an evolution roadmap to try to update and improve the vision, operating model, and financial capacity of that group. Where does that reform process stand today, and what kind of concrete changes can we look for?
Well, first of all, I think we are really on the move on a lot of areas. I think that we have been looking at our financial firepower. There we have actually sweated our balance sheet, and we have actually measures in place that will allow the bank to increase its lending capacity by about $150 billion over the next 10 years. That is for our non-concessional window. We have, of course, the concessional window for the poorest countries. There we need to rely on donor generosity, and we are currently negotiating the next round, and we would like to stay ambitious and hopefully get a result over $100 billion mobilized.
Now, nearly half of World Bank funds are currently earmarked for projects related to climate change. Give us an idea of exactly what that funding is being used for. What kind of concrete initiatives for communities that are bearing the brunt of climate change?
Well, we are providing financing in all sorts of areas. Take the energy area. We are big investors in renewable energy. Take also initiatives about helping in the urbanization, particularly dealing with air pollution and how to bring that down. We are also looking at farmers to introduce climate smart agriculture that is both good for the local communities, but also for food security. So there is a whole set of measures where we are dealing with it. We have special attention, particularly to those countries that have been less responsible for all the emissions. Take, for example, Africa, only responsible for about 3% of global emissions, yet disproportionately affected by climate change. You see that with inundations, you see it with desertification. And there we have all sorts of programs in place that help these local communities deal with it, and not only in the short term, but also particularly in the long term.
As we speak, the COP16 conference is taking place in Colombia, really addressing the question of biodiversity. Why is biodiversity an economic priority?
I think that we can no longer separate the issues. The same with the climate change. All these issues have direct impacts on development. So we have decided for and have said for a long time, you cannot only talk from climate change or biodiversity and then you move to the topic of development. They are all intertwined. So you have to analyze them together because they affect the economic prospect, social prospect, and particularly the communities that are involved on this. So therefore, biodiversity is hugely important. We are strong supported in that. We are participating in this area, and I think you will see more activities, particularly in biodiversity, over the next years.
Governments around the world are reining in their foreign aid budgets. What kind of a role does the private sector play in helping to meet the World Bank's development goals?
The private sector has always played a central role on this. And the truth is that if you look at the economic growth, you will need that to create that through the private sector. The jobs are created by the private sector. Usually they are not created by the public sector. So we need to stimulate private sector investments, private sector activities. So we are helping countries with the regulatory macro frameworks that there is a stable environment to invest, but also concrete investments in infrastructure that allows actually the private sector to thrive. We emphasize that if you look at the big development challenges of the day, as well as with climate change, the money that is involved cannot be mobilized only by the public sector, but we need to rely on the private sector, and therefore their participation in our discussions here in Washington at the annual meeting is very, very important, but also at COP, be it in Cali and the COP 16 for biodiversity, or COP 29 for climate change in Baku in a couple of weeks. We need to do this together, and only together we will be able to solve this problem.
Two major conflicts are raging around the world at the moment in Ukraine and in the Middle East now. What kind of aid, what kind of funding is the World Bank providing for those populations that are really struggling to survive here?
Well, as I said at the outset, the Bretton Woods organizations were also great on the reconstruction. So we have always been involved in fragile countries and all countries also that have been affected by war. We have been at the outset been helping Ukraine. It was basically 10 days after the attack by Russia on Ukraine, we went to the board with a $750 million support package. We have been helping the country. We have been helping also countries that are supporting Ukraine through creating trust funds, guarantees that we can provide the necessary support. Through all these mechanisms, we have been able to mobilize about $50 billion for Ukraine, and most of this has been dispersed. So we will continue with the support also in the Middle East. We are active in all areas, and particularly on the humanitarian side. Here, the collaboration, particularly with the UNHCR, as well as with the World Food Programme or UNICEF, are especially important because in tandem we work together so that we can support these organizations also to get the necessary humanitarian aid to the affected populations.
And that's certainly going to be a long-term and uphill battle. Axel von Trotsenburg, thank you so much for joining us from the World Bank today.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's all for now. Don't forget to look for People and Profit on the podcast platform of your choice, or as always, on the France 24 website. Until next time, thanks for watching.